Greetings. I'm Howard Barouxis, and I'm a managing director with Valenta in Miami, Florida.
And I'm Jake Day. I'm a managing partner for Valenta in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, and also Atlanta, Georgia.
Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly podcast and webinar, the Valenta 2.0 Weekly. In this webinar and podcast, we'd like to talk about the latest things that are going on in the world of digital transformation and technology, as well as Valenta. Let's get right into it, Jake. For you, was there anything that was like super interesting this week that you'd like to share?
Yeah, actually met with a client this week. We were talking about different automation opportunities, a lot of the same things that we talk about on this podcast, showing them the cool stuff that some of our tech partners are able to do in terms of robotic process automation. And I took them through an automation calculator that we use to help clients understand if certain processes are ideal for automation. And it kind of dawned on me, we've never taken this group, our listeners, through that automation tool, that calculator before. So I thought we might take a step back, and I will show our listeners. And if you're only listening, if you're not watching, since this is recorded, it's definitely going to be on our YouTube channel. But if you're only listening, I will talk you through the process as well of how you can access this automation calculator, also how you can determine if your processes are ideal for automation, and some of the tools that we talk about on the podcast. Does that sound like a good idea, Howard?
No, it sounds like a great idea. And yeah, for our audio listeners, I'm sure you'll just talk us through the questions and the answers, and they don't need to worry about going to YouTube. It'll get just as much out of it, or almost as much out of it,
Exactly.
if you're watching it. So yeah, take it away. Why don't you share your screen?
Sure. So this automation calculator lives at valenta.ai. If you go to that website, and all you have to do is just scroll down just below the first picture, the first image, you're going to find this button that says find out using the automation feasibility calculator. It's the answer to the question, can your business benefit from process automation? Once you find that section, just click on this button, find out using the automation feasibility calculator, and it'll take you right to the calculator and ask you to fill in. There's 6 screens to the calculator, but each screen only has just a few questions that we'll walk through quickly here. If you want to go directly to the link where this is at, it's valenta.ai/automation calculator. It's very easy. So if you're using it often, you just want to remember that. Hyperlink, definitely do that. But all you're going to do here is it's going to ask you to input a process name for what you are wanting to assess. We're going to say invoice processing. It's often a common process that a lot of businesses want to see if it's worth automating or not. Who performs the task? Maybe invoice clerk. And it's going to ask, what is the salary of this person? And so this doesn't have to be perfect. It can be estimated. So we'll just say, for example, our average invoicing clerk makes about $32,000 a year. Then you'll click continue to the next step.
They make more in Miami, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are the decisions rule-based or subjective/strategic? That's the first question on the second page. So in a lot of processes like invoice processing, it'll be mostly rules-based. It has a series. All of this is a drop-down menu. On every question, it's a drop-down menu. So for example, in this one, it'll either be exclusively rules-based, mostly rules-based, some subjectivity involved, mostly subjective, or exclusively subjective. So that's the type of options that you'll have on each one of these. But we'll just say that this one's mostly rules-based. What does the majority of your input data look like? What we're trying to figure out here is how much is digital versus non-digital, structured versus non-structured. So it's going to give you options related to that. So we'll say for this type of invoice process, it'll be digital and structured data. It'll ask, how will your process change in the next 6 months from a process stability standpoint? Now, what we're getting at here is we're trying to understand is if you have significant changes to how you'll be processing invoices in this example or conducting your process in the future. So in a lot of processes, there'll just be no change expected. We've been doing it this way for a long time. We think that there's opportunities to automate what we have. So in this example, we'll just select no change expected. The next question is, how will your process change in the next 6 months from an application stability standpoint? And really what we're trying to understand here is, are you planning to change the application that you use to process invoices? For example, we process it in QuickBooks today, but maybe we're moving to Workday in 6 months. That would be an application change. Or we're going to start accepting invoices through bill.com. We don't today, but we will tomorrow, right? So just going to give us an indication about if there is an application change going to occur. In this example, we'll say no change expected. We'll click continue on. It'll ask another series of questions on page 3. What is the frequency of this process? Goes all the way from daily to annually. We'll say that invoice processing in this company is a daily process. What is the approximate volume of transactions? So for example, number of invoices being processed. So we'll say that we process about 300 of these per day. What is the average time that it takes for a process to run once in minutes? So in this question, you're thinking about it from the perspective of how long does it take to process, an invoice from beginning to end, right? We're trying to understand from whatever point in the process, from beginning to end, that you're thinking that you want to automate. That's the scope that you're thinking about. So for example, you could have an invoicing process where the invoice comes in via email. Someone has to assess whether the dollar threshold means that the invoice can just be paid automatically, or whether it needs to be taken through a series of approval steps before the invoice is processed. Then you might have a piece of the process where you'll have to do some data inputs and manipulation in order to tell the system to pay the supplier or the vendor. And then a lot of times you'll have a payment process as well. That whole process might actually take 15, 20 minutes or more to complete. In this example, what I'll show you here in this example is you might have a process, and this is very similar to something that we have going on with the client right now, where we're just trying to automate the part of the process where when an invoice comes in, we're trying to determine if it meets a dollar threshold where we can automatically pay that invoice, or whether it needs to have further approvals. And that process to determine whether it can be auto paid or not only takes about 1 minute. And so that's the scope of the process that we're talking about here. So that's the reason why I'll just put in 1 minute for this example. What is the approximate percentage of human error? We'll say in this process, it's not a whole lot. There might be 1% of human error because we misread maybe 1,000 for 10,000 or the such. And so it doesn't happen very often, but there might be a little bit of human error involved. And then it asks, how would you characterize the peaks of the process? Does this have regular peaks that we can anticipate? Does the process have rare peaks or rare events that are sometimes hard to predict? Or does the process not have peaks at all and is completely standard? So you'll just select which option seems to apply most to your process. We'll just say that the process doesn't have any peaks at all. And then on the final, on page 4, how many steps does the process have? This one might be a pretty straightforward process. It might have, you can select anywhere from less than 10 steps to greater than 40 steps. And then we have several selections in between. For this one, we would say there's about 10 to 15 steps in this process. How difficult are the decisions that you must take to complete this process? It could be very linear, where there's no decisions at all. That's actually most ideal. The process might involve some yes or no type decisions, but nothing too complex, or it may have complex decisions that we would need some advanced AI programming in order to facilitate. If you're talking about an invoicing process where we are trying to determine whether we can auto pay it or not, that's probably just going to have some yes or no type decisions in it. So that's what we'll put there. What is the average number of cases where you were unable to complete the entire process? There might be instances where we get an invoice in and perhaps we don't agree with what they're asking us to pay just from looking at the invoice. And so maybe in the last uh, uh, period of time, there were 5 invoices where we couldn't actually facilitate this process. So it's just trying to determine here what types of exceptions we might be dealing with. How many applications do you use for the process? Anywhere from 1 application to 5 applications is what we have programmed. 1 application, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, or 5. You know, in an invoicing process, you're probably only using 1, probably no more than 2 to 3 for this type of process that we're talking about. So we'll say they just use 1 application. Then are any of the applications accessed via remote desktop? This is where this application perhaps doesn't reside on a local computer, but we have to dial in remotely to an offsite computer to facilitate this process. We'll say no on this one, if this is a process that's handled by a local invoicing clerk on their own company computer. And then on the last page of input data questions, what percentage of your input data is digital? This is where you have to put in a certain percentage number. So we would just say, you know, most of this is digital data, so we'll say it's 90%. Is any of your digital input scanned? Are any of the invoices maybe scanned into a system and then emailed to you or not? We'll say yeah, sometimes they are scanned in. What percentage of your input data is structured? Again, this is another question trying to get some further indication on how easy it's going to be for the bot to potentially read the data. If you're talking about a PDF, sometimes you have structured PDF data, sometimes you have non-structured PDF data, so that's something to think about. But we would say for most of the invoices that we have coming through for this particular process, it'll be structured data, so I'll select 80% or more. And then it gives you the option as well to assess multiple processes, to go through this questionnaire for multiple processes before you click the final submission button. For this example, we'll say there's no more processes we want to analyze, and we'll continue on. And then what it's going to ask is for you to put in your name, your email address, also your phone number, company name, and then also your location. And then what will happen is you'll click finish and it will spin for a few minutes, and then you're going to receive an email. And in the email, you're going to have a report that is attached. I'll just pull up the report real quick and show you what it looks like. So this is the report that you'll expect to receive. And right at the top of the report, it's going to list all of the processes that you input for assessment. In this example, we just submitted 1 process for assessment, invoice processing. And then what it tells us here is that the automation potential is 88%. So if you're wondering what the threshold is, what would be the threshold to where it would not be ideal for automation? Less than 60% probably means that we need to think about doing some additional process consulting to standardize your process a little bit more before we start trying to figure out how to automate it with bots and the such. But anything over 60% becomes fair game for automation. You're probably going to be able to get the ROI that justifies the investment in the bots and in the technology that you would need. So this is the number that you're looking for here. And then what we'll do is also give you all of your input answers to the questions. This report is, you get to keep it, it's yours. And then we also will send it to managing partner for your area who will, I use this with my clients to track. They submit all the time potential ideas for automation in their organization. And then what I do as their managing partner is I track that on the back end to try to understand what processes are kind of next that we need to talk about. what's not. And then where we do have opportunities for automation, that's where we start recommending our technology partners that we talk about on this call all the time, and make their business much more efficient in the long run. So that's what I wanted to show today, Howard.
Wow, that's great. I'm really glad that you ran through that. I have used that tool many times as well with clients, and they always like it. And again, yeah, over 60%, you probably got some opportunity there. So, and it doesn't take that long. I mean, really, you could fly through it a lot quicker than you did. You really took you took good time to kind of go through and explain everything for our viewers and our listeners. So, thank you for that. Um, I have a feeling we might be overtime based on that demo, which I think was completely a good use of our time. So I'll probably skip talking about what's going on with me and things that I found that were interesting this week, because I did see quite a few interesting articles. I will share one thing though. So I've got a webinar coming up as part of our Insider series on Wednesday. Probably will happen before this gets published. We're recording it a couple days before, but we usually like record these on Mondays and publish them on Thursdays or Fridays. And my webinar with Yellow is Wednesday, June 8th at 1 p.m. And it's going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk a lot about conversational AI. And they just so happen to have dropped a lot of like really interesting articles over the last couple of weeks. I probably would have talked about on this podcast, but I probably will talk about with them on the Insider, and maybe we'll bring some of them to this series when we do it again. But they had a great article about 60 chatbot ideas, how to engage customers with AI, AI in performance management or HR management, and then a favorite one of mine, AI in real estate as well, because I've got a fair amount of real estate clients in Florida. So, but I'm sure it'll be a great conversation. I would ask you guys to join us, but it'll happen after the fact. But we will publish this online as well, also on YouTube and on Apple and Spotify as in podcast form. So please feel free to check that out over on the Valenta Insider series. Jake, you got anything else you want to add for the day? Whoops.
No, looking forward to that. Looking forward to the Insider series. It's always fun to talk with Yellow, so I'm looking forward to it.
All right, cool. Well, we'll call it at that. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.